So welcome to the EcoStructure for Healthcare session. We have a very interesting discussion today among a number of our guests who will be joining us on a panel to discuss digital hospitals. And hopefully we'll have some good interaction between a number of people who have been working on healthcare for quite some time, and then we'll welcome your questions, okay? So we're going to begin with just maybe 3-4 overview slides just to kind of warm things up a little bit, and then we'll go right into the questions, okay? But before I start, let me introduce our guests. So we have here Dave Pitman from Arup. We have Daghan Yalcin from ISS in Turkey, and we have Carl McKenzie, who's joining us from Elementa, which is part of the DAR group. Okay, and they'll spend a moment giving you an introduction, about 5-10 minutes. Okay. So let's begin. So it's our point of view, and working with leading consultants and with the people that are on the edge of healthcare, that the future of healthcare, it's about collaboration. It's about patient-centered care. It's about breaking down silos within the hospital to bring the best disciplines together to solve people's problems on the clinical side. And as part of that, the patient-centered journey around a digital hospital is a key piece of this, from our point of view. And what's driving that is quite a number of trends, okay? First, you can see, I would say a fundamental trend is aging population. This is driving more and more demand for healthcare, and yet public budgets and costs in private systems are staying the same, which means that we're struggling to do more with less, and do more with less at the same quality or even better quality. And so this is driving digital. So if you think about airport check-ins 10 years ago when they would have people there, you find a more efficient way to do things with digital to provide a better experience at a lower cost. We're looking at the explosion of the Internet of Things, which in healthcare has done quite a bit on the patient record side of things and to try to improve the flow of healthcare. But what has been a bit untapped, except for the newest and most advanced hospitals, is to use the digital inside an intelligent building and connect that to the workflow of a patient-centered care process to make a difference, right? Safety is paramount, because if some of you are in healthcare, you know that even in the world's most advanced, most technologically advanced hospitals, your chances of being harmed is 1 in 10. Be harmed by the hospital is something that you didn't come in with. And so to use intelligent systems to help overcome the limitations of our human mind to prevent errors with intelligent systems and all those bad things, about 15% are related to facility things, fire, power outages, et cetera. And finally, cybersecurity. We have heard about all the hackers that have come in through electronic health records and hold ransomware. We saw it in the UK and in the newspapers. But what most people in hospitals don't realize is that you can hack the hospital through the infrastructure so easily. In fact, our person who's working with Dave from Schneider found a tool, and in 4 clicks found 6 hospitals in the London area that he can click right. He didn't do it because it's against the law, but easily could hack hospitals through the infrastructure. So digital. So digital is changing the equation, right? How can we do more with less? How can we improve patient safety? How can we improve the experience? And to move from what used to be reactive mode when something happens to proactive, to be able to use analytics and to predict so that we can optimize and use the limited amount of labor and experts we have in a more efficient way. And the world has moved from as you know, your smart devices to connected devices to a system of systems where analytics now make it possible to move from reactive to predictive. So now I would like to move to our guests. And maybe Carl, you could start with a brief introduction, each of you a brief introduction of what you've been working on and your background.
Yes, my background is into science and healthcare engineering, and I've been doing that for a number of years.
I think I'm going to need this.
Sorry. I look at this with the private sector and with healthcare, NHS in the UK. I sit on a couple of boards to advise on that as well. And I've been doing some research into certain things like renewable energies and healthcare systems. That's me.
Okay. Daghan?
Yeah. I have been working in the facility management sector for the recent 4 years, but predominantly in the last 12 years I have been coming from the construction sector. Mainly I'm a mechanical engineer, so I'm here today for giving my overview from the facility management perspective.
Thank you. I've actually been working in the healthcare sector for 28, 29 years. I joined the NHS in 1989, worked for the NHS until 1997, and at that time I joined Arup. And for the last 21 years, I've been working predominantly in healthcare. And by predominantly, I mean I think I've done 3 other projects other than healthcare projects in the last 20 years.
Very good. So we have some very experienced guests. I'm going to just pull up a chair here. So we're going to focus the conversation on digital hospitals because that's what's new. It's been new, especially on the clinical side, but still a bit newer is on the infrastructure side. And so I'd like to, maybe we'll start with Carl again to get your opinion of what's your vision around digital hospitals, the major trends you're seeing in
This may be a little bit of a long-winded answer, but the way I am looking at this is the environmentally responsible healthcare. I see the big issue coming up as climate change, and if you look at a number of studies, climate change is going to be the biggest threat to human health in the 21st century. So if that's the case, this is where we've got emissions from hospitals and buildings contributing to climate change. And whilst there's legislation related to this, i.e. in the UK we've got the Climate Change Act, which is looking at reducing emissions from hospitals, and they should be net zero by the year 2050. Hospitals are still producing something like 27 million tonnes of carbon emissions in the UK, which accounts for about 7% of the carbon footprint. So what we're looking for really is tools to assist facilities managers in the way that they can actually operate hospitals to mitigate the carbon emissions. They've got a number of things they've got to do in terms of performance, reducing energy, integrating systems, infrastructure systems, and emergency systems, and they need the tools to do this. One of the things that they need is real data. They need real data so they can look at the monitoring and analysis so they can actually mitigate this, and the only systems that can do that in terms of controls are digital. So really that's the path we're following to see how digital healthcare can actually help reduce the impact of hospitals on climate change.
Interesting. And Daghan, what are you seeing in Turkey?
I will try to explain my overview from the facility management perspective, also most particularly from the technical services perspective. Well, in our country, I can say that in the recent 15 months, I encountered to open 4 new hospitals, which is consisting about 10,000 and more beds. That we can assume that each hospital is average on a bed count is about 2,000 beds. So if we look at the numbers, that we can say that these 4 hospitals is more than 7 million square meters GLA. So if we compare it with some huge projects on hospitals, these are some of the biggest ones that we have opened in our country. So what I can say about digital transformation brought into our life is, yes, as an integrated facility service company, it just turns the complexity of this service management into a simple vision. So on the second hand, from the technical perspective, all that healthcare facilities are critical environments, and so with the digital touch we are more compliant, and we know what we are doing, and we are able to control everything.
Interesting. So it's an interesting perspective. What are you seeing, Dave?
I'd like to speak about two themes.
Sure.
The first theme is is the stuff around keeping the hospital functioning and running, and how digital can help us do that, do it more efficiently. And the other theme is really around medical intervention devices and actually patient safety, and how the digital revolution is going to help us in that regard as well. Taking the first one. There is a ratio, and we're not sure if this is 100% correct, that every pound or every euro that we spend in capital is reflected as something like £14, €14, $14 in revenue, so capex and opex, and there's very rarely any connection properly made. I can see digital helping in the future in terms of helping us be more efficient. I can certainly see us moving some of that revenue money into the capital, so we'll have increased cost of hospitals. But I think we need a more mature market, more mature relationships with collaborators, with construction partners to realise that. From a medical perspective, there's all sorts of challenges, and we've heard about the Internet of Things over the last day and a half. But there's also something called the Internet of Medical Things. Medical devices these days are becoming very, very clever with machine learning. They're not only speaking to the patient, getting data back from the patient, but they're speaking to themselves. That in the future is going to impact us and going to change how we actually design our spaces as well. So I actually think, and this whole point about digital revolution, this won't be a revolution in a few years' time. This will just be normal. And if I might say one other thing around patient safety, and to your point, Mike, something like 10,000 people a year die in the United States for incorrectly prescribed drugs, and the figure's 1,600 people in the UK. I mean, these incredible numbers, and I think digital processes will help us in that regard. So patient safety, and there's an organisation in the NHS called the Patient Safety Group, is actively looking at interventions around with digital technologies and how that can actually keep people safer.
Very interesting. So kind of interesting themes here, right? Carl's saying, looking at sustainability, and that's what we're going to need digital in order to really realize that. Daghan talking about the how we can be more efficient in the maintenance of buildings, especially the mega hospitals that he's been building, right? How are you going to do that? And looking at this at medical equipment, patient safety, as well as this OpEx, CapEx. So now, if you think, what are the challenges? So together, think about that, to achieve that. So you have this great vision. We want to build this digital hospital. To achieve that, maybe you sell that to the Ministry of Health. Maybe you sell it to the hospital CEO. And then the construction process gets involved, right? There's design all the way up to construction. And then there's all that OpEx piece that you have at the other end, right? So from vision to making it happen, what are the challenges, but more importantly, what do you think the solutions can be to make digital a reality all the way through? And maybe we'll go in a different order, so we'll start with that.
Okay, I'm starting. So if you look at this room, so it's just so complex. There's so many components that we can talk about. But let's look at the digitalization thing in a simple way. So I am just looking it in 4 segments, or in 4 parts, basically. So in the first part, there is the device part is coming, which we are known as the IoT sensors and all the devices we are using. And one of the obstacles is coming from here, because yes, we have the OpEx and the CapEx models for buying these equipments, but at the end of the day, for the healthcare, whatever you need some thousands of these sensors, and so this is the cost issue coming in the first place. So on the second part, there is the connectivity. We have lots of talks around the room about the cybersecurity, the gateway, so how we connect these devices with the systems. So this is the thing that we are facing in the future, also there's a threat waiting for us about the cybersecurity. On the third line, and what is most importantly, is the data management. So we can take this as the IoT platform that we serve our things, starting from the IoT sensors and the solutions to our customers. So what I see in the market is companies are mostly coming to a point of the monitoring. So, but what people are lacking in the system is the artificial intelligence part of it. So this is one of the obstacles that the companies are not compliant with the artificial intelligence, so they are just monitoring phase. And the last part of this digitalization journey is the application. All these three steps are finished, and we need an application. It could be an application on our cell phones or a software interface on our computer. So without completing these three steps, it is impossible to deliver our solutions with these apps. So the problem in the market is companies mostly cannot deliver all these three steps completed, so the applications are also missing.
Interesting perspective, especially on the digital journey as to what's needed to do. But Dave, would you have a different perspective on trying to realize it through the whole design all the way through to the execution?
Just being slightly controversial for a minute, I think that we need to have different conversations, because the people who are in control of these projects, I think, look, in the UK, lowest cost very often wins. I think there has to be a realization that for organizations to engage in these conversations, initially things are going to be a little bit more expensive. I think so we need better conversations about value across the whole value chain, and first cost shouldn't be the consideration. There are also other less tangible but probably more important issues around, and to this point about cybersecurity, the point about ethics. Healthcare people by very nature are conservative. Their job is to make people better in hospitals, but there's all sorts of ethical considerations about data, how we store data, how we use data, how we make determinations based on that data, and to the point about being able to hack through ports, the cybersecurity of that data. So these are huge issues, and nobody's really, in my opinion, willing to make that that monumental stand and build the first smart hospital for all sorts of reasons, political, and I think less technical and more political.
Interesting. Carl, what's your perspective?
So my perspective would be that if you're looking at a smart hospital, you've got to start at the beginning. And so what you'll be looking for is what's the guidelines, what's actually out there to give you a steer. The NHS, I'll go back to the UK, the NHS has got its own guides and things like BMS and controls, but those documents are out of date, archived but still in use in some parts. The building industry has got its own guidelines, what it looks at in terms of practices. We've got the building controls institutes and industries, they've got their own guidelines. We've then got the sustainability guidelines from the NHS sustainability groups. So they all set out guidelines, but the problem is they all reflect good codes of practice which were written at the time, and that time has passed. So they are looking backwards in terms of what can go forward, and they're not thinking about the way to go forward and to take forward the leap in integration and technology. But that's not to say that the NHS hasn't gone down the lines of digital initiatives. They've actually started at least 3 where they've gone down the digitalisation of information on sites. So they're looking at that as a process. They're looking at the Internet of Things in terms of hospitals, and they're looking at that with a vendor and with a healthcare trust to see what the outcome of that is. And they're also looking at digital hospitals with Schneider, in fact. So it's a process that's moving, but like all governments, unfortunately it's slow. So what they will need is an injection from, say, the private sector potentially to make them a bit more agile to understand what's actually out there and what can be achieved.
So Dave, what benefits have you seen from digital hospitals, even if you say it's not all the way there yet, either benefits you've seen and benefits that you think will come?
Benefits I've seen are all around maintenance, actually. At the moment, predictive maintenance, because one of the other challenges, and this is from my previous life in the NHS, what we did in terms of how we maintain things was very prescribed. And on a cycle, we used to do things, change pre-filters, do this, do that, do that. But having digital systems, as we do these days, we can actually make very much informed decisions about how to sweat the assets. And that's huge value. That actually produces huge value, particularly in maintenance. And it means that you concentrate your workforce, you concentrate the revenue that you have on doing things that need to be done. And I know there's an example of a hospital in the States where they used a kind of predictive maintenance strategy on a dry transformer, and the transformers was predicted to fail in X amount of weeks and months. And as a consequence of doing that, it were able to actually inform the facilities people and get that changed out. Now that sort of predictive, analytical, almost machine learning maintenance is actually here now. And people are actually engaging this, so that's good. And I actually think that's a route in some part to help fund other streams within the NHS. So I've seen that. In terms of patient safety, and sorry to harp on about patient safety, I've seen systems that are actually linked to pressure pads, even CO2 sensors in rooms. And speaking to a colleague over the last couple of days, there are systems that are used in other walks of life, other industries that we could actually use within the NHS as well. And one of the things I think all of us healthcare designers have got wrong is that we tend just to look inwardly at our problem from our perspective, and there's some of these issues are being solved outside. So I'm seeing a little bit more of that, a little bit more cross-fertilization across industries.
Mm-hmm. Carl?
I can just sort of expand on the point that David has made there. I think one of the other things that's also taking place is that medical equipment is also being looked at in terms of its performance and data. So and its impact on the built environment is now being considered. I think what the digital health also allows for is the future trends that's taking place and changes in clinical work, where there's going to be much more acute work done in the hospitals and less acute work pushed out to patients going home and doing it at home in self-administration and monitoring. That allows for things such as big data to be integrated into the healthcare clinical models. I think the other big, probably exciting part is to see that healthcare and biomedical science is changing slightly, that they're starting to share clinical work, and that collaboration is starting to take place in terms of campuses and sharing that. So that will allow the collaboration, the sharing of information, the sharing of resources, the sharing of elements like that, which has not been achievable up to this date, to take place in the future.
What are you seeing at ISS? What benefits are you seeing or have seen?
I totally agree with Dave and Carl. Yeah, the maintenance perspective is just changing to a standard maintenance to the predictive maintenance part. It is a really big impact from the point of benefit. But I would like to add also from the facility management perspective that what we see is when we have the outline-based contracts rather than the efficiency of the equipment, also this digital approach leads us to decrease the number of manpower we are using. So especially in the public-private projects which I mentioned before, in a 2,000-bed hospital, we are working around 1,500 people for these services, and around 200 people are the technicians and the engineers working on the technical side. So just imagine that when you have a digital operation, I'm not meaning the current BMS operations. The digital operation is something that you have tracking all your SLAs and KPIs and all the work orders in a digital manner. So you can reduce your people and manpower up to 15 to 20%. And on the other hand, of course, you control your equipments more efficiently. And what you can offer to your customers is, yes, we save energy, and more on that from the perspective of the carbon emissions and other efficiency things, that you can offer your value propositions more efficiently.
And maybe continue with that, and if you consider, now with analytics, maybe some of you've seen here today, some of you've seen in practice, what are the additional, if you think about the infrastructure in particular, let's say, right? And we talked about sustainability, patient safety, efficiency of maintenance, right, around these kinds of things. Maybe there's other big, but within that, what are some of the high value problems for either facility staff or the hospital that have been unsolved with prediction, analytics? Where do we need to take it as a next step? Do you see some gaps of where things need to go?
Well, I can say that I can also give examples from our current situation, what's happening in Turkey. At the first step, the facilities are opening, there is a test and commissioning situation, and we are entering into an operating situation. So what we see that the digital world is just used for monitoring. So what happens when you only monitor? You cannot predict what's happening in the future. So that makes us work with extra manpower. So in a hospital, that I can say that without having only the BMS, not mentioning about the assets or other second level integrations about the artificial intelligence, the difference between having an automation system and without having an automation system is just 48 people. So this is a huge cost when you think about annually, and on the other hand, you don't know the control. So this is the worst point, that you have a critical environment and you don't know the control and you don't know what's going to happen. So this is the most important thing, I think.
How do you calculate that, 48 people? You said that there's a 48-person difference. For what size hospital? How did you get to that?
Yeah, you can just imagine like that. That size of hospitals, just from the air handling units, I can give you an example that just imagine that you have a football stadium, and on that football stadium you have about 360 air handling units. So if your BMS system is not working, you are saying that your personnel to go to the air handling unit on the up floor and find the 200 and something air handling unit and close the three-way valve. So when your daily operation started, and if your BMS or the artificial intelligence is not working, you take the daily breakdown numbers and make your tickets and SLAs. So you see you have a certain number of people, and you start to measure how much people you need more. So we came up to a point that it is just 48 people.
Wow.
It's enough to fully make the operation.
Wow, very interesting. Carl, maybe some comments related to that is, the question was, you can build on what he said, and/or the question was gaps that you're seeing, where there's a bit of digitization coming in the hospitals, especially around the facilities end of things, where we need to go.
In terms of gaps, I don't think there's a technical gap, and it's just to borrow something that David said, that the other industries are doing this. I think what the gap is in, saying things like the healthcare people I get involved with, it's a knowledge gap. It's a knowledge gap about what's actually achievable, what's been done before, and a conservative view about how do we go forwards. Some of the things that may influence that, David also mentioned things about the sort of operational cost against the sort of capital cost. In some of the modelling and design elements, you could actually integrate some of the functions that we talk about, the contract and the cost aspects, that would help influence that decision as well. So I see the gaps not so much as being technical, but as being a knowledge gap and an element where you're trying to sell this to a conservative mainstream of people that are making decisions.
Yeah, totally agree. I think the generation that comes behind, certainly behind me, is going to be so much better than me. It's going to be so much. It's going to be wired. This digital revolution that we speak about, digital transformation, it's within their DNA. It's going to be normal. I think some of the issues around trust in the equipment to do. I've spoken recently to utility companies, and we had this kind of digital reading system on this high voltage system. I know it's a bit technical, but one of the things that they wanted to do is to they wanted it all hardwired, and it's because they couldn't trust the system. Can you hear me still? Is that okay? Yeah, they wanted it hardwired because they couldn't trust the system. They didn't want a digital solution. They wanted a hardwired solution. So there's an element of trust. There's an element of proving the technology. And I think that's really, really important. You know, I joked earlier about data centers being more resilient than healthcare buildings, but they are. And data is more important to some people than healthcare in terms of, you know, so we can learn an awful lot from these people. And a lot of people are putting their trust in technology, but still there's a conservative element that won't do it. So there's naysayers, there's people, there's a piece of work that needs to happen. It's probably none of the people are represented in this forum here. It's all the people who are not here. You need actually to reach out to other people. You know, we all know it's cool, right? The others need to figure it out as well. So there is an element of education. But as I say, you won't need to worry about that education because that cohort will be retired soon anyway.
So we have a closing statement, and then we move to questions. So I would say maybe take a minute or two for a closing statement, Carl, and maybe some questions I didn't ask, but you think would be particularly important to share with the audience, or from your experience, or related to digital hospital.
Well, the closing statement really is, I think, is that digital technology is required, and it is required in order to combat what I see as being the biggest challenge in terms of emissions from buildings. But I would also like to just echo on the point that David has made, which is about the future, that people coming behind us are actually more appreciative of digital technology, and so the future looks brighter in that respect, because they will be willing to make decisions that will push us to a slightly different mindset to where we currently are. It is the solution, and we just need to make sure we've got the right people making the right decisions in the near future.
So, as conclusion, I can say that when we think about the digitalization from the view of we have the need, and the solution is, of course, the digitalization, and the outcome is, yes, there is lots of outcomes we have talking here, but I want to end this conversation from that classical trilogy that digitalization is making us to measure everything in terms of what we are doing, and this measurement makes us know the environments that we are managing, and this leads us to the control. So the trilogy is the measure, know, and control. So, and if we are in a critical environment, the only thing that we need is the control. So digitalization is enabling us to control our environments, but mostly what I want to see in this kind of forums and more is the artificial intelligence part of it, because artificial intelligence is taking it far more beyond that what we are, and it is the value added part of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just like to end on the why. Why bother? Seriously, why bother? And I actually think we should ask that question of ourselves. And as soon as we get the right answer, or the answer to the why bother, then we'll be in a better place to actually articulate the value. So why is really critical. And the why is around, for me, it's around patient safety. It's around efficiency of processes. It's about saving money. And it's about a system, if you think of healthcare as a system, that's completely unaffordable. When the NHS was formed in 1948, 2 years later, Aaron Bevan, the founder of the NHS, presented to the British Parliament, and he said at the time that the NHS is unaffordable. So in 1950, the NHS was unaffordable. In 2019, it's unaffordable. So digital technology, the adoption of digital technology, digital techniques, can actually help bridge that gap. And connection, but we need to define it. We, the leaders in this community, need to define the why.
Very good. Thank you, all three of you. So now I'd like to open it up to the audience, and hopefully there's a microphone that we could share. If any of you have any questions for our panel members, please feel free to ask.
Great panel, thank you very much for your insights. What do you think will drive the adoption of digital technology in healthcare? It's obvious that healthcare industry is basically latent in adoption. It's clear to us that they need to step up. What would make them change? What are the key success factors to get them across the line?
My view, and this is my view, is that we want to keep people out of hospitals because they're not great places to go. And what will, in my view, what will drive it is care, maybe more in the community, care in the home, people taking more responsibility for their own healthcare. You know, the so-called use of smart watches and how that potentially in the future, because they're not that smart, are they? Not really. But they're not as smart as they're going to be. And I know the Federal Drug Administration in the States has just sanctioned a watch that actually properly records heart arrhythmias. And why that's cool, you could be walking down the street and this watch could be sending a signal to something, and this something could actually find out that you've got a heart problem, put it through some sort of analytics, and by the time you get home there's a beta blocker being delivered by Amazon. Yeah, so I think potentially digital technology will be driven not from inside the hospital, from outside the hospital, and this ever increasing burden on NHS where people take a little bit more responsibility for themselves, and how we do it I think will be through digital technology.
If I can just add on to that, I mean that's already taken place, that sort of study is going forwards, and as I mentioned earlier, the NHS as an example is looking at digitisation, and there's 3 different models that I mentioned that they were taking place on. I think the thing that will get it across the line will be the economics at the end of the day, to someone to actually look at these models and prove that economically it's viable to do so. And you know what we are seeing, as David's mentioned, is that there is a reduction, is what's hoping for, in the clinical model itself, where the acute model in the healthcare is smaller and is more care in the community. But the element that will push it forwards will be the economics.
What I can add is there are some keywords we speak in here, like the critical environments and the cost issue. But if we focus on the outcomes, what we are doing wrong mostly, or why we are doing late, is we are focusing on the process starting from the cost issue. So I think we should firstly focus on the values and what we will get. Then the rest will be more easy and easy to solve. So what I can add is this one.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, great panel. Congratulations. A particular question regarding the patient safety is about bacteriums that appears in the hospitals, inside of the hospitals. Can we help these people with some technological solution to solve this?
I would have said that that's more of a operational and process issue rather than a technological issue. It's about design, it's about clinical operations, it's about elements that we do there. I would have said that would have been more of a factor in reducing these types of issues rather than a technological one.
Any other comments?
Yeah, have you got a specific example where you think, can you?
For example, the Legionella bacterium.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sure technology can help us do that. In terms of the whole patient safety, we mentioned pressure mats. Interesting to see yesterday from when we were connected to Andover, this whole issue around acoustics. and how you can control acoustics or be at least aware of acoustics problems. And there's this work done by Professor Roger Ulrich at Texas A&M that talks about this therapeutic environment and keeping patients calm. And I think technology and digital technology can do this, but you've got to measure. And when you measure, you get data, but you've got to do something with that and create, meaningful information. So I think it can. I think there's a need to do it actually, because the other downside of people being injured and in hospitals, and the whole issue around patient safety, is that people's length of stays increase as a consequence, again making it unaffordable.
Maybe I could add to that, so we have 3 different types of solutions that we've been experimenting with, right? The number one cause, there's in-line infection, we can't help that, but hand washing, because physicians and nurses don't wash their hands. A lot of small startups started with hand washing monitoring, a lot of that, so we put that into the EcoStruxure lab to try to put it in. That's one. 2, there's the Legionnaire's disease. So putting a sensor to measure water that hasn't moved for more than 3 hours, that's between 25 and 50 degrees C, where the bacteria really starts to grow, and to send an alarm if you have that. And the 4th is HVAC. If you ever looked up into the HVAC after 5 years and you looked at all the stuff that's growing up there, you wonder, But the issue we've had, even though we really wanted to do this, in fact, even as much as 8 years ago, is we don't have the clinical studies, and we haven't found people to actually prove with clinical medical evidence, right, at this level. At the hand washing, actually, there's a lot of evidence, but not yet at the clinical study level, but there's a lot. So I think from my point of view, there's room for technology. I mean, maybe I ultimately would agree that it's a process issue, right? But, wash your hands.
that is just a quick one on terms of washing your hands.
That's not enough.
No, but also the design guidance in the UK, and maybe it's the same across the world, actually over-designs in terms of water storage anyway, and you end up flushing we speak about energy, you end up flushing the water away, so you keep the water moving. So I think there's again, it's back to the why, is that, what problem are you trying to solve? And maybe the problem actually is in the guidance that we have initially that actually leads us to have this situation where we have stagnant water.
So you have time for one more question? Okay, well then if there's no other questions, then I thank you very much for spending time with us to hear about EcoStruxure for Healthcare, and thank you very much to all 3 of our panelists who really shared many, many years of their experience about what they're seeing and what we need to do. So thank you very much. Yeah.